So I'm Ameenah, and as you just heard, I recently actually graduated from university with a first, woo. And during my final year project, I looked into sustainability and circular economy and to see how I could create a sustainable solution to some of the waste that's being produced by, by everything. Obviously, I ended up narrowing it down to the cosmetics industry, mainly because I was looking at my own habits and trying to reflect on myself, but then came to realize that there's a much larger issue at hand. So, I'm going to let you know how we can all start painting a sustainable future with yesterday's trash. I've created a set of watercolor paints made from waste cosmetics. This has a unique property in that it has a cosmic shimmer, as my user testers have told me. This unique property would usually have to be found through mining things like mica, which can often be problematic to actually find. But what I'm trying to do is using those properties found in cosmetics already, using that as a pigment to then develop a new paint. Yeah. So, what's the point in focusing on cosmetics anyway? Well, it was found that around 120 billion units of packaging were made from the cosmetics industry. Still, you're probably thinking, but it's not as much as anything else, right? The issue is that we need to start thinking of everything as quite a big issue. Something small might actually be one of the contributors to the amount of waste that we have in this planet that we don't realize we're contributing to ourselves. When I was going around stores and doing my research for this project, I found that mainly the reasons that were given to me about why cosmetic retailers were throwing this stuff away is because they were either dropped, damaged, or discontinued. And due to lawful and hygiene reasons, it meant that they can't resell these on their shop floors. So sometimes that might mean that maybe somebody's just stuck their finger in something. Straight away, that can't be sold on shop floors anymore. So that would have to be trashed. When I went to larger retailers, such as Debenhams, you would see that the cosmetics counters often didn't realize where their trash was going either. So they would collect it into a clear bag, and then it would get taken away by loss prevention, by the magical loss prevention, and then disposed of properly. Usually what this means is that it gets directed to their head offices, and then it gets trashed. Not really what we're looking for. So no surprise that the color cosmetics industry is growing hugely, especially with things like Instagram and YouTube and all the makeup tutorials. Color cosmetics are shooting. In fact, by 2019, it's estimated that it would have grown by about £4 billion since 2014. That's a lot of makeup, that's a lot of trash. So what are retailers doing to tackle this problem? Well, it turns out, not much. Unless people are keeping it quite quiet, the only real solutions that are being provided at the moment on a mass scale that we all know about would be things like Lush, where they're trying things with their naked packaging, and the Body Shop, who would recycle their packaging as well if you bring it back into store. But besides that, other color cosmetics and makeup companies aren't really doing that much. So, this is where I introduce to you a couple of new terms to some of you. Most large companies work within a linear economy. That basically means that they take resources, they make their products, and then these end up getting disposed of. What I'm trying to introduce the idea of today is a circular economy, where, I guess in a nutshell, you would be putting resources and money back into the economy and actually showing that this is not only good for our environment, but also good for businesses. So here's just a couple of examples that are already working in this way. Someone like New Life Paints and Paint 360, they take industrial paints, they recycle it, and make it into a new paint. And you can actually buy these for your own houses if you really wanted to. But this is an idea of recycling. I'm trying to show that we can find value in products that you wouldn't otherwise think of and see if we can upcycle them instead. So, for instance, something like copper, it's found in wires everywhere. And often there are really difficult ways and dangerous ways to retrieve that copper in poorer countries, when we could be designing something which makes it easier to retrieve that valuable material and putting that back into the system, rather than going through raw materials and resources to try and get that again. So, this is where I'm talking about trying to find the value in waste that we wouldn't necessarily see. When it comes to color cosmetics, I decided to focus on powdered color cosmetics. I refined down the issue to see how I could find the value in the color. Because ultimately, when we buy color cosmetics, like eyeshadows, blushes, we look at the color. So if that's the part that we need, maybe it doesn't need to be for the use on skin. Maybe it doesn't need to be recycled. We can turn it into something else, and we can make it of more value, and make it useful, not only just for those who wear makeup, but for artists everywhere, beginners, professionals, absolutely everyone. So, there are already some initiatives of upcycling and turning waste into art. This could be anything from little scrap bits of yarn and making little toys out of them, and making jewelry out of random little beads. But here, I want to show how you can do something on a mass scale, as opposed to just little DIY projects. So, I decided to collect together a lot of the similar colors. For this project, I had an influx of donations. This is when I realized, actually, it's not an individual's problem, because usually when we buy makeup, we keep it, we hoard it, we don't find that urge to throw it away. The retailers who have, like I said, dropped, damaged, discontinued their products, this is where all this waste is coming from. So although here I've collected up all of these different brands, with cosmetic retailers there would be a consistent color, so people could have a batch of a color for every single watercolor paint that is made. So, making the paint took a lot of experimentation and a lot of research. Collecting these colors together was only the beginning. Having grounded it down into a pigment, I could then use typical paint making methods, and speaking to artists and chemists, I found the best way to do this. Finding a binder and other materials or fluids to increase the fluidity to make sure that it actually paints as a normal, typical, standard paint would. So I could tell you all about design thinking and how we should all be great designers, but the reality is, it just takes a hell of a lot of research. You need to speak to a lot of people who know what they're talking about. I didn't know anything about chemistry, I didn't know anything about making paint. But with research, with speaking to the right people, going out of your comfort zone, more research, making a hell of a lot of iterations, so there were obviously bits that were a bit gloopy, and a little bits that were a bit crumbly, but yeah, you just have to keep testing, keep going back to your research, doing more research. It sounds horrible, I know, but once you have an idea that you know could probably change the world, it's worth doing that research, it's worth doing that testing. And eventually, something awesome could happen. So once the pigments were collected and I had tried creating this paint, I initially targeted professional artists. I tried creating it into an oil paint. But also I had to be realistic about my abilities in such a short amount of time. So although I had created an oil paint, I realized that the standard of the paint at this stage, without extra funding and backing from an actual cosmetics company at this stage, was really not realistic. But through user testing, I found that it was more due to the fact that it still had the crumbly feature that was found in cosmetics. People like the shimmery property, but it wasn't up to the standard for a professional artist. But then it made me think, this shouldn't be a downfall. This shouldn't be a setback. I learned from it, again, do my research, until eventually I came up with a set of watercolor paints. I tested this over and over again with a number of people who like to paint for leisure. And eventually, I found that you can simply agitate it with water and start painting away. It's once you've found that idea that you can then start thinking about all the fancy bits around it. So the packaging. I ended up finding out that I could create this packaging using compressed paper for the insert, plywood, you can laser cut it, all this really fun stuff. But remember the main reason behind it, trying to make this sustainable, using sustainable materials and thinking about longevity. Like I said, you can then start thinking about all the other little details around it. For instance, when it would be sold on the retail art shops and the shop floors. But the main message here that I want to give to you guys is that if you have an idea and you know that it can make a difference, it doesn't matter what quality it's at, just put it down on paper, because that's the bit that really is the catalyst to everything. You'd think as a designer, my drawings would be a hell of a lot better than this. But like I said, the reality is the little bits and scribbles that you put down on paper are the parts that really matter and the parts that can really make your journey worthwhile. And you don't have to worry about it all being perfect. You can let people criticize it because it's a scribble. But your idea is still there and it's still worthwhile. So yeah, that's kind of my simplified journey of how I came to create this set of watercolor paints made from waste cosmetics. And I'll be around a little bit later because I've brought a set of watercolor paints with me if you did want to try them out. But thank you very much for listening.